I know my brother loved Dr. Pepper to death. He loves Dr. Pepper. So let me just turn this down. Unless you guys want to.
There's nothing out there that tastes quite like Dr. Pepper because it's famously a unique blend of 23 different flavors. It's like a puzzle because they'll tell us the number of flavors but not what they actually are. When it comes to carbonated soft drinks in the United States, I don't think I have to tell you that Coca-Cola and Pepsi have been far above the rest. It's always been the case. Their products combine for an impressive 2/3 of the market. It kind of makes you feel bad for Dr. Pepper because they've been living in their shadows for over 100 years now, but they've been catching up, currently at an 18% market share, which is closer than they've ever been. As of 2018, the company is called Keurig Dr. Pepper. They are valued at tens of billions of dollars on the stock market and bring in sales of over $11 billion a year. And that is not $11 billion worth of Dr. Pepper alone, or Keurig. They are the owners of all these popular soft drinks. This company is a result of a decades-long, complex web of acquisitions that have generally been intended to gain better control of that market. I'll talk about that with more detail, but Dr. Pepper has been at the center of it. Now, I'm going to warn you that my next sentence is going to be terribly misleading, but technically true. There was a time when Dr. Pepper was bigger than Coca-Cola, and I say that because Dr. Pepper is older than Coca-Cola, but only by about 6 months. It is considered to be the oldest American soft drink brand, going back to 1885.
I did not realize it was the
Dr.
oldest.
Pepper was the name of the person who invented it, but it's not true. The actual inventor was a pharmacist named Charles Alderton. He was working at a pharmacy in Waco, Texas, called Morrison's Old Corner Drugstore, owned by a man named Wade Morrison. See, typically back then, pharmacies had these soda fountains, so Alderton was over there combining a bunch of these flavors, attempting to make something that would resemble the smell that was in the air from having all of these ingredients around. He ended up creating something that he felt was pretty tasty. Morrison liked it as well, so they started selling it at that pharmacy. As far as the name, nobody quite knows exactly why they called it Dr. Pepper, but one of the more common rumors happens to be my favorite. It is believed that Wade Morrison used to work with a man named Dr. Charles Pepper. Morrison fell in love with his daughter. Pepper didn't approve of it, so he named the drink after him, I guess kind of like a gift to help him win that approval. But if I had to take a guess, I would say that it had more to do with it simply being a catchy name, and since it was advertised as a health drink bought at a pharmacy, I have to imagine that they used the word doctor because it promoted that brand. But either way, the unique flavor combination and a catchy name meant that Morrison's Old Corner Drugstore was selling a lot of Dr. Pepper
healthy
to
for
a
you.
point where after a couple of years,
No, it's all that.
It's
all good, June. Thank you for dropping by.
Charles Alderton, the inventor himself, was more interested in continuing his work with medicine. So as Morrison wanted to expand production, Alderton took this as his opportunity to just step away from it. Morrison then teamed up with the owner of a nearby ginger ale company named Robert Lazenby. It was a good pairing because Morrison had the recipe and the proven brand while Lazenby had the means of production. So the two of them formed this partnership, initially to sell the syrup to other soda fountains, but eventually third parties would start bottling it, and the Dr. Pepper that we know was being sold and becoming a local favorite throughout different parts of Texas. In 1903, Wade Morrison died, ending any involvement from the two originators, which was truly bad timing because the following year, Robert Lazenby demonstrated Dr. Pepper at the World's Fair in St. Louis, giving the brand some serious promotion. I mean, this was quite an event. Again, not fully confirmed, but it's believed that this was the first time hot dogs, cotton candy, waffle ice cream cones, and all these other common foods were introduced to a wide audience. There were almost 20 million people attending that fair, many of them drinking Dr. Pepper and eating hot dogs for the first time in their life. From that point on, Dr. Pepper was on the map. It went through some ups and downs, of course, over the next 80 years or so, but it always seemed to have these effective marketing campaigns that would propel the brand forward. In the 1930s, they started this long-running 10, 2, and 4 campaign. They really committed to it. They made it part of their slogan, and if you look at an old bottle of it, they actually printed those numbers around the label. I know, it's confusing without context. There were some new studies that showed those were the times people tend to lose energy and get sleepy during the days, so those would be the perfect times to drink a Dr. Pepper, because all of the sugar inside of it would give you energy.
I see.
It's kind of genius when you think about it. It's providing a schedule for you to drink not one, but 3 Dr. Peppers every day.
Yeah.
In the 1950s, you're not going to like this if you're strict about grammar, but they dropped the period from their name, likely as another marketing move just to make the logo and the labels easier to read. Then, in the 1970s, they introduced what I consider to be one of the catchiest campaigns of all time. It was called Be a Pepper, and I'm going to warn you, before I play this song will get stuck in your head. Here we go.
I'm a pepper, he's a pepper, she's a pepper, we're a pepper, wouldn't you like to be a pepper too?
How could that not be a successful campaign? And following it, things were looking promising for Dr. Pepper. Then, in the 1980s, things started to go bad. Their profits were declining while their market share was dropping to less than 5%. They had gone into debt to acquire some of these bottling plants, which wasn't helping things, but the bigger reason behind the trouble was the competition. The soda industry was getting so competitive. I don't want to get too sidetracked here because it could take over the whole video, but Coke and Pepsi were really feuding at the time. It was being called the Cola Wars. And with competition at an all-time high, I think the new plan among the smaller companies was that they needed to combine with each other and find ways to grow if they wanted to remain competitive. So with that mentality, Dr. Pepper went searching for a larger company that wanted to buy them, and I'd like to highlight the 6 different owners that they've had from that point. It does get a
6
little
different
messy.
owners?
I'm
Oh
going
my
to try
God.
to keep it all straight. In 1984, they were taken off the stock market after 38 years when they were bought by an investment firm called Forstmann Little and Company in a $615 million leveraged buyout. They then sold some of Dr. Pepper's assets, like those bottling plants, to lower that debt and basically reverse some of those recent changes that proved to be harmful. Then, in 1986, Coca-Cola themselves attempted to buy Dr. Pepper in a $470 million
Really?
takeover.
Huh.
It never happened because it was ultimately blocked by the FTC for obvious concerns of a monopoly. But it came close and was actually a response to Pepsi's attempt to buy the popular brand at the time, 7-Up, which also was not allowed to happen. So we can take that one off the list. But what did happen later that same year was an investment bank called Hicks and Haas bought Dr. Pepper in a $416 million leveraged buyout. Then, that same bank bought the American operations of 7-Up. It was really big because at the time they were the 3rd and 4th largest soda brands, who they then combined together into their own company called Dr. Pepper 7-Up that went public on the stock market in 1993. That was an arrangement that only lasted for 2 years because in 1995, that combined company was acquired by Cadbury Schweppes. Now, this is getting interesting because Cadbury Schweppes was another one of those smaller soft drink companies in the early 1980s that decided that they needed to grow to remain competitive. So now, I need to take a second to list out some of their major acquisitions over that time so we can understand the significance of this deal. In 1982, they acquired Mott's, the company who makes the apple juice, for $60 million. It was a deal that also included the brand Clamato. In 1986, they bought the brands Canada Dry and Sunkist from R.J. Nabisco for $230 million. In 1989, they bought the brand Crush from Procter & Gamble in a $220 million deal. Then in 1993, they acquired A&W brands for $334 million, which also included the brand Squirt because A&W had bought them 6 years earlier. Leading us to 1995 when they made what was by far their biggest acquisition. They bought Dr. Pepper 7-Up for $1.7 billion. I should say that they had already owned about a quarter of it from deals that they made a few years earlier, so that price was for the remaining percentage of it. All of those other acquisitions gave them a 5% share of the US market, and by adding Dr. Pepper 7-Up, they increased that to 16%, which, keep in mind, was still pretty insignificant compared to Pepsi and Coca-Cola. I think that helps show how much of a gap there was in the first place, but the non-cola market was growing faster than the cola market, so it still put them in a very optimistic place. I'm going to continue with this acquisition list because I have 2 more big ones. Well, first off, in 1999, they sold their non-US soft drink business to Coca-Cola for $700 million. So to this day, if you're watching this in any other country besides the US and happen to have Dr. Pepper near you, that is, in fact, still made by Coca-Cola. The reason reason they sold it was because they were completely focused on the US beverage market and wanted to use that money to acquire even more brands. That same year, they bought Hawaiian Punch from Procter & Gamble for over $200 million, and the following year, they bought Snapple Beverage Group from Triarch for almost $1.5 billion, which, in addition to Snapple, included RC Cola and Diet Right. So by looking at this, we can see that it was really Cadbury Schweppes that brought all these brands together. It's just that Dr. Pepper has been the more consistently strong one among them that they've used to represent the company. Like in 2008, going back to the first list, Cadbury Schweppes spun off all of these beverage brands
Dr.
into
Pepper
their
Snapple
own
Group,
separate publicly traded company called Dr. Pepper Snapple Group. They essentially brought all of them together and then let them go out on their own. I should mention, in 2016, that company bought Buy Brands for $1.7 billion. Then, the final change in ownership was in 2018 when Keurig Green Mountain, you know them for their coffee makers, bought all of Dr. Pepper Snapple Group for $18.7 billion, and that is where they are as of the making of this video. To summarize, and just so we're clear, here is a list of all the major brands currently owned by Keurig Dr. Pepper. Among that list, for the US, we have the #1 grapefruit soda, the #1 and #3 orange sodas, the #1 and #2 ginger ales, the #1 apple juice, the #1 root beer, the #2 lemon lime soda, and the #1 single-serve coffee maker, among many others. Just think about how entering the 1980s, almost none of these brands were associated with each other, and now here we are, more than 40 years later, and they've all slowly merged together into a company that is still not even half the size of either Coca-Cola or Pepsi.
Dr. Pepper
Let me know
Snapple
in the
Group
comments.
sounds like
Should
what
I make a video
Judy
about
would
Coke or
call a
Pepsi, or
drink
maybe
drawer
both
in
of
a
them?
mini
It
fridge.
really seems like that's the logical place to go from here, but until then, what do you think about everything in this video? How Dr. Pepper has been used as the centerpiece to create this company that, at this point, I think at least stands a chance against the other two. You have to respect Dr. Pepper. They were the first and remain a leading brand, despite being completely overshadowed. For the better part of their more than 130-year history, they have hung in there and have helped do some big things. So any thoughts you have about Dr. Pepper or anything else I talked about, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Be a pepper, drink Dr. Pepper.
Thank you for watching.
Drink Pepper, drink Dr. Pepper. That is gonna get stuck in my head, huh? He's a pepper, she's a pepper, everyone's a pepper. I think I got those lyrics wrong, but I think Dr. Pepper needs a shrinking flavor. Everything needs a shrinking flavor. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. Let's see, how much time do I have left? Yeah. Maybe. Yeah, I think maybe I'll watch one more. Only because I'm curious. Let's see. I'll do Frito-Lay. Alright, this is from a while back. Okay. It's a very interesting
Frito-Lay.
channel.
Now, this is a fun topic. I remember in detail when I first learned they existed. I must have been in first grade, and these flamin' hot Cheetos were extremely popular at my school. Well, one day, one of my friends told me that they were made by Frito-Lay,
Drop
and
them and
that
stuff.
was one
Oh
of
my
the most
God,
confusing
Mika.
sentences that I've ever heard. I knew all those words, but they were put together in a way that didn't make any sense. Here, it was like if someone had told me that the makers of PlayStation was a company called Sega Nintendo. What do you even make of that? But he showed me the little symbol on the bag, which was hard to dispute. I spent the next few days asking everyone I knew about this. The general feedback was something like, Frito-Lay, yeah, they make a lot of the chips, but I still had so many unanswered questions. Then recently, I saw this idea for a video submitted through my website, and it brought me right back to when I was wondering all of this. On the back of a lot of chip bags, you see Frito-Lay near the bottom. I had a few questions about this company. Who is or what is Lay? Why Frito? I thought it would be a cool topic to cover. And a lot of other people have been suggesting this too, so for anybody who finds all this strange or confusing, I'm going to try to straighten all of this out by making the video that I wish had existed when I was in first grade. I'll tell you about what these names are and how they came to be in a minute. They're actually really good stories. But first, let's go through some of their brands. When you're in the supermarket and you're going down
God, Dark
Girl,
Girl.
a much higher portion of it than you may think. Now, of course, they own Fritos and Lay's, and those are two really big brands right there, but that's only the beginning. They own 3 large brands that rhyme with Fritos. They own Frito, Cheeto, Tostito, and Dorito, in addition to Sun Chips, Funyuns, Cracker Jack, those grandma's cookies that I never liked, Matador, that's those meat sticks, Munchies, Rolled Gold Pretzels, Ruffles, Smart Food Popcorn. There's many more that I'm not listing, but those are the main ones. They own the biggest brand in just about every chip category. So if it's big, you're safe in assuming it's Frito-Lay, with a few exceptions. Here's some of the leading brands that they're not associated with. You have Pringles, Cape Cod, Utz, Bugles, Snyder's of Hanover, Mission. None of those are associated with Frito-Lay. And if you're ever in question on whether or not they produce something, just look at the back of the bag and look at the bottom and see if it has that symbol. Now, since 1965, Frito-Lay has been part of Pepsi, and actually the second biggest part of Pepsi in the way that they break down the reportable segments. One of their 6 segments is Frito-Lay North America, which includes their branded food and snack business in the United States and Canada. Essentially everything I've been talking about in North America. And in 2017, that segment alone generated $15.8 billion in sales, which is 25% of their total sales, and 42% of their operating profits. So obviously one day Pepsi themselves should be part of this series, considering everything we're talking about here is only a quarter of their sales. So stay tuned for that one down the line. But for now, let's forget about Pepsi and focus on Frito-Lay. The name Frito-Lay is a result of 2 amazingly similar companies coming together. First, let's look at the Frito end. That concerns a man named Elmer Doolin, who in 1932 had an ice cream business that wasn't doing too well. Remember, this was during the Great Depression. So he comes across this Mexican gentleman selling fried corn chips for 5 cents a bag that were essentially Fritos. They were called Fritos because in Spanish, Frito means fried. So that's where the Frito part comes from. Now, Doolin over here with his ice cream business struggling was thinking about how he might want to make a switch into something like this. Just selling these little bags of corn chips for 5 cents. I can only theorize as to why he was so attracted to it, but I'd guess that he saw value in it for the customer. It was a good-sized bag, provides a bunch of calories, you get full, and for 5 cents. Now, I know, it's the 1930s and a terrible economy, but still, 5 cents. Plus, they must have been some pretty tasty Fritos. So Doolin started talking to the owner of this little Frito business, and I'm sure he was happy to learn that he was actually looking to sell it so he can move down to Mexico. Now, here's something really important for anyone thinking about buying a business from someone, or really buying anything from someone. Find out why they're selling it, and if they say they're looking to move away and can't keep it anymore, that's what you want to hear. I called it a little Frito business because this was just about as small as you can get, and there was nothing special about it. There were others in the area selling very similar chips. The price he paid was $100, which essentially just got him the recipe, a few retail customers, and an old piece of equipment to make them. He moved it all into his mom's kitchen and started making them there and selling them out of his car. Daily sales were typically less than $10 per day, 8 of which went toward covering costs, meaning he was pocketing $2 a day. Can we just stop to think about that? The Frito part of the Frito-Lay that we know Frito today started out with sales of $10 per day. What is that, like 2 family-sized bags today? Now, let's take a look at how the Lay side of the business started. And unlike Frito, Lay is someone's name. It comes from a man named Herman Lay, who also had a background in the ice cream business and
that's
also
funny.
bought into a small chip company for the amount of $100. We have to stop again to emphasize this. Both sides of Frito-Lay were brought into their current form through a $100 purchase. And as if these two stories weren't similar enough, they both obtained the money through a loan. Both of the purchases were made in the same year, and they both started by selling them from their car. The key differences are, well, one is corn chips and one is potato chips. One was in San Antonio and the other was in Atlanta. And then Herman Lay only bought in on part of the company initially. He didn't take over the whole thing until a few years later. Whereas Elmer Doolin went all in at once, so Lay was involved with a considerably larger company to start. And the similarities continued from there, just making dollars a day early on, but then slowly growing their business in the ways that you would expect, hiring salesmen to increase their sales and expand their reach, expanding their manufacturing capabilities to fill those sales, and both of them eventually advertising through their own mascots. Lay's had Oscar the Happy Potato, and Fritos had the Frito Kid. In 1945, the two companies started working together. It makes sense. Two very similar businesses that offer products that aren't identical. Plus, they were serving different areas of the country, one from Georgia and one from Texas. They came to a pretty smart deal that said the Lay's company would exclusively be allowed to manufacture and sell Fritos in their part of the country, and the Frito company would have the same rights when it came to Lay's in their part of the country. The two of them were now making both chips. After 16 years of this arrangement, with both of their revenues well into the millions at this point, the two companies decided to merge into one. The newly formed company was called Frito-Lay, and that's how it came to be. But some bad news for Doolin, the head of the Frito company. He actually died a couple years before the merger and never had the opportunity to see the existence of Frito-Lay. A few years later, that company merged with Pepsi. I'll save the details of that for a later date. But that explains the chip brands, Frito and Lay's. But what about the rest of the snack aisle? How did all of this happen? Well, let me go through some of them. Cheetos were an original creation from the Frito company and are actually said to have been created by Elmer Doolin himself in 1948. The rights to make Ruffles were bought by the Frito company in 1958. So at the time of the big merger in 1961, 3 of the 4 major brands of chips the combined company possessed were brought to the table by Frito. But Lay's did bring the smaller brand of Rolled Gold, who they had bought just before the merger. Then in 1966, the combined company of Frito-Lay developed their first major brand together, Doritos, who quickly surpassed most of the other brands in terms of sales. 3 years later, they introduced Funyuns, who, in my opinion, is a terrific name, but not the best product. Then in 1977, they introduced Tostitos, which were created based on customer feedback from Doritos. In 1980, they acquired Grandma's Cookie brand, who, again, I think is a terrific name, but not the best product. In 1989, they acquired Smart Food Popcorn, which was just a regional brand at the time, but they made it national. In 1991, they introduced Sun Chips. In 1997, they acquired Cracker Jack. Alright, I didn't cover every brand they own today, but I think you get the point. You can see that they're bigger than you know, and how they came to possess a lot of the brands that help make them bigger than you know. I'd like to think I answered these questions, and any questions that I had back when I was in first grade. So if I ever get my hands on a time machine, first order of business is to go back to the late 90s and show this video to myself. And then maybe try to prevent World War II or something, but this first. Let me know in the comments. Did you know about the extent of Frito-Lay? Or maybe you didn't even realize they existed. Unless you're closely looking at the packaging or take notice of all those trucks on the street and at the gas stations, I don't know how else you'd know. Maybe you heard it somewhere randomly, like I did, but if that's the case, there must have been some confusion happening. So I hope I set things straight. I also want to mention, this is a deep topic. In this video, I mostly focused on their size and how the two separate companies formed and came together, but
I'm
there's
going
so
back
much more.
$400 and buying Fritos in Lane.
Around how they got so big and dealt with
Smart
competitors
move.
with some major business
Smart
choices throughout the
move.
years. Touch on things like flavors and product lines, but everyone was requesting that I make it in this format, which makes me think many people don't realize how big they are, which is understandable, so maybe this was a smarter place to start. Also, I just like this topic, and I think it'd be fun to make something about Frito-Lay's marketing, focusing more on their ad campaigns and mascots. I touched on some of their early characters, but then there's things like Chester Cheetah and Frito Bandito was a whole thing. So let me know what you think of that idea. There's definitely more to talk about when it comes to
Eat
Frito-Lay,
shit.
so
I
any
just
thoughts
used my
concerning the
money
company, leave them in the
and
comments.
shit I hate,
I'd
yeah.
like to hear what you have
I
to
misread
say.
end as
Thank you
eat.
for
I was like,
watching.
why would you do that to yourself? Alright. 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 Okay. Alright. 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 Yeah. Yeah, that was a pretty fun watch. And, you know, I learned a few things. So I'll definitely have to, you know, watch that channel more during my off time. But yeah, I'm yeah, it was fun watching those videos with you guys. Man, $100? God, that's crazy.